Hey everyone, this is FIDE Master Kavutskiy here for Chess.com, and today I just wanted to share with you guys a really neat combination that I found just sort of randomly while studying some chess, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to show you guys some of the beautiful geometric possibilities in chess. So if you want to just try to solve this puzzle without any hints, feel free to pause your video right now. It's white to play and win. Okay, so assuming all you ambitious players already paused your videos and tried to solve the problem and found the best move already, so we're gonna move on and go ahead and proceed with the solution, and hopefully I can give you guys some advice as to how to find these sorts of tactics based on thinking about the position and the coordination and harmony of all the pieces sort of logically. By the way, playing white here was the great Viktor Korchnoi, and his opponent was another strong player by the name of Solak. So in this position, if you're trying to solve for the right combination or the winning sequence of moves, the first thing you always want to do is look for candidate moves. So candidate moves, what that means to me is like the moves you sort of have to check first before looking at anything else. And these are typically forcing moves, captures and checks, especially checks, right? Because these are forcing moves, that means that your opponent will often have only one or two or maybe three possible replies. Then it makes things follow a very clear path, and it's very easy to calculate long variations because there's not a lot of deviations in your calculation process. Also, checks and captures pose danger to your opponent. So, if you can mate your opponent's king in two moves, right, that's going to be much more useful than, for example, gaining space on the queen side, right? Or if you can capture some kind of pawn or a piece and then they can't recapture, then obviously that's great, and you're going to win the game. So that's why it's always necessary to look for candidate moves first. Okay, so what are the candidate moves in this position? There's knight d5 check, there's knight takes e5, rook takes d6, and queen takes e5. Basically, I listed the only check and then the three captures, right? So different players have a different opinion of which moves should you look at first. Should you look at the most promising moves because they're most likely to work and then you've saved a lot of time calculating and you already found the best continuation? Or should you look at moves that seem very silly so you can just rule them out immediately and then forget about them forever? Well, again, everyone has their own opinion. Sometimes, I don't know, I like to mix. If one move seems really promising to me, then I'll just look at it first and calculate it as far as I can. And then if it's winning, then maybe I'll examine some other options, but most likely I'll just play that move, right? Other times I just want to eliminate really silly moves so I don't waste any time in the future thinking about them. In this case, it's like this move, queen takes e5, right? It's very unlikely that this move leads to anything. White probably just loses a queen. There's really nothing to look at there, right? So we can just eliminate that move immediately. Okay, so the next move I want to look at here is knight d5 check, right? This move seems promising because it gives a check to the opponent's king, and when you give a check, black only has a number of replies, and posing danger to the opponent's king is usually a good idea. So we should definitely make sure and check this move. So probably black's most natural reply to this is knight takes d5, and then now we have to look for more candidate moves, right? So we have to look for more checks or maybe a different capture. So one check that is now available that wasn't available before is queen g5 check, right? Since the knight on f6 is now on d5. But it doesn't take too long to see that black can simply play his knight back to f6 and his king is safe, and white hasn't accomplished much except lose his knight on c3. So knight d5 check doesn't seem like a good move because black can simply take this knight. maybe it is a good move, but it's certainly not the winning move. Like if we have to just recapture the knight on d5, then black can make some other move, and they can probably defend their position. So the next move I would look at here is rook takes d6. And the reason I would look at this move next is because if we capture this pawn and black recaptures with their king, then their king immediately becomes a little bit more exposed. It's now on this open d file, right? So let's play this out. And now that the king is on this open d file, suddenly white has a lot more options, which is what makes this move seem very promising, is that suddenly white has, rook d1 check, queen d2 check, queen d3 check, and also this move knight takes e5, all which seem to pose a little bit more danger to black's king, which leads me to believe that we're on the right track, right? So now, the next move of this combination is probably the hardest to find. Rook takes d6 is kind of an obvious move because it's a candidate move. It's a capture, it brings the king out in the open. It's very natural to take a look at this move. So now, in order to find this next move, you need to be able to be very aware of what is going on in the position. There are certain tactical elements that give chess players a hint that they might have some tactic or combination available to them. In this case, not only is the king very exposed on d6, but the queen on a5 is also loose. It's not defended. So, given that hint, I hope everyone by now has found the next move already, which is queen d2 check. Okay, so why queen d2 check and not queen d3 check? What's the difference? Well, here, the queen is setting up a discovered attack against the black queen. And as we're going to see in evaluating black's options here, is that if this black king goes to some kind of hotspot, for example e7 or c7, then white's knight on c3 can jump with a check, and white will win the queen on a5. Okay, so I feel like now we've discovered sort of the essence of this combination. It's this loose queen on a5. So white gives up his d1 rook for the d6 pawn to not only to bring black's king closer to the center and on an open file, but to get his queen to d2 with a tempo. And you might be wondering, well, how is it possible to find this move? I mean, the only way to really justify rook takes d6 is by following it up with queen d2 check. None of the other moves lead to anything. Well, I think the way Korchnoi found this combination is by first examining this other move, queen d2. So queen d2 comes with the threat of queen takes d6 check, right? And it also comes with the threat of knight d5 check, winning the queen. So probably at first he was very excited about this move. And, even if he was ready to play it, at some point he must have noticed that black can defend against both of these threats with one move, either queen b6 or queen c7. The queen gets out from the line of attack on a5 and defends the d6 pawn. But this is when the chess player's mind really starts working, is that they sort of intuitively realize, something clicks in their brain that, oh, well, if I can get my queen to d2 with a tempo, black won't have time to get his queen out of danger, and then maybe I can set up this discovered attack and win the queen. And that's where rook takes d6 comes into play, right? It forces the king to d6, a vulnerable square, white gets his queen to d2 with a tempo, and now, as you'll soon realize, black has no way of escaping this check without losing their queen. So king c7 and king e7 would be met with knight d5 check. How about king e6? Well, now look for candidate moves. Knight g5 check. And the king is forced to go to e7, which is one of those hotspot squares. Knight d5 check wins the queen, right? Okay, how about king c6? Look for candidate moves. Okay, knight takes e5 check. And now if king b6, what should white play? That's right, queen d6, mate. So, is that it? And the answer is no, that's not it, right? We've calculated the black's most simple reply, which is just recapturing the rook, right? And we've seen that white wins in all those lines. But rook takes d6 is not a check. You know, black actually has something like, 15 legal moves here. But the point is that we have to examine black's other options, because black also has forcing moves of their own. Fortunately for us, there aren't that many good moves here for black. In fact, there's none. White is winning. What black played in the game was probably the most testing move, which is knight g4. And this is definitely a move that you should have looked at if you were trying to justify this combination tactically, if you're trying to make it work, right? Black attacks the queen, and now queen d2 is perfectly acceptable. We've defended the rook, black's king is exposed, and we've set up this threat against the queen on a5. But why not look for more forcing moves? And in the game, Korchnoi played the best move, queen g5 check. So now if bishop f6, white can play rook takes f6. Look for forcing moves, always. Knight takes f6 and knight d5 check. And white has won 2 pieces for the rook and is probably going to mate in a couple of moves. So that's good for white. If knight f6, I think simply queen takes e5 check is going to lead to either winning a bunch of material or checkmate or a combination of the two, right? So we have to look at probably black's best try here, king takes d6. So now what? Well, queen d2 check. But of course it's a little different here, since black's knight on f6 is now on g4. And this means pretty much 2 main differences. The first one is that if black now plays king c6, we don't have knight takes e5 check. But what can white do there? Does white have a way to win? If not, then the whole combination doesn't work for exactly this reason. But fortunately, white is still winning because of queen d5 check. Okay, follow along. Now if king b6, we have queen d6 check with mate. And if king c7, then what? Well, knight b5 check. Again, king b6, queen d6 mate, so king b8, and queen d6 check. Black's only move is queen c7, and then queen takes c7 mate. Right? That's a separate line from what we've seen so far, but I think it only adds to the beauty of the combination, since it's really cool that white also had this mate available once the knight left f6 and went to g4. But of course it was necessary for Korchnoi to see that entire line before playing rook takes d6. Okay, otherwise that move was sort of reckless if he didn't know for sure that he was winning in all possible lines. So king e6, now knight g5 check, king f6, and knight d5 mate. Right? Beautiful checkmate. 2 knights, the king, center of the board. Awesome stuff. Right? So it didn't make much of a difference, but it was important to realize that black does have this possibility of playing his king to f6 once the knight comes to g4. So I hope that example was really entertaining to you guys, because it just shows some of the beautiful possibilities that chess has to offer, right? White gives up his rook and then obliterates the black king with his queen and 2 knights, which, I don't know, to me is just really nice. And then, of course, the final position was just spectacular. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'll see you around on Chess.com.